So I wanted to first of all thank everyone for coming. You're giving me an hour of your life, and I don't take that lightly. I'm going to use this hour to wake you up as best as I can of what's going on. Ironically, I actually wanted to deal with some safety issues first because I'm going to be speaking a fair amount of truth in this lecture, and the reality is the truth hurts, and it can hurt quite a bit. And I can say some things if you haven't woken up that might upset you. So because we were concerned about this at the NHPPA, and it'll help explain this picture too, is we decided to do a safety study. Because when you're going to introduce a novel chemical as a drug into the human system, you have to do safety studies. And what you do is you introduce a little bit of the drug into some animals, and you just keep increasing the amount, and you wait to see at what point are you going to get adverse reactions, including death. And we decided at the NHPPA to do an animal study with rabbits. And so we started giving this lecture to a warren of rabbits, and we were measuring how much truth was being delivered. And when we got an adverse reaction, we stopped. And this was the adverse reaction. This little guy at the front, we were just discussing as the thing says that the rabbit was responding. I got to the point where I was talking about how Health Canada is going to regulate natural products the same as chemical drugs. So then we weighed the rabbits and figured out how much truth had been given. And we kind of guessed on what the average body weight of this audience would be and how much truth could be delivered. So I think we're safe. But if I see anyone looking like this during the lecture, I'll back off and hopefully we'll be okay. Now, it's a very interesting time for us because Health Canada has signaled to us that they are going to start regulating natural health products the same as chemical drugs. Like there's a whole bunch of changes coming down the pipe. And most of us don't even understand how our drug laws are structured. And I want to ask the audience, but don't answer until I tell you how our drug laws are structured. But I wanted to ask, what do you think the purpose of our drug laws are? And basically our drug laws are structured so that everything is illegal. The starting point is anything used for a therapeutic purpose is illegal, and we're only allowed to have access to the things that Health Canada then says that we can have. It's literally like you're sitting in a cage and you've gotten sick, and Health Canada will stick a treatment through the bars and say you can have access to this. But everything else is illegal. And it's important for you to understand that the standing point is that you cannot use anything for a therapeutic purpose unless Health Canada says that you can have access to it. And that's how we've chosen to structure our drug laws. And so I just wanted to ask, why do you think we've structured our drug laws that way? What's the purpose of this? Does anyone wants to venture a guess? What's that? Okay, so protect the pharmaceutical profits. And I have to say I was expecting an answer like that. But the interesting thing is if we went just to downtown Calgary and just started asking people on the street, most of them would think that our drug laws are there to protect you. And in fact, I'll share with you a funny story that happened in court. I was cross-examining a Health Canada expert. And when you are a lawyer and you're cross-examining somebody, you never ask a question that you don't know the answer to. And obviously I hadn't interviewed this witness, but I was really confident I was going to get a yes answer back. And basically what I had asked her or suggested is, well, Health Canada's there to protect our health. And I'm expecting a yes. But she's under oath, and she's not going to lie. And so she wouldn't give me the yes. And I kind of tried to circle around and get it, and I was getting nowhere. And then she explained, no, the purpose of Health Canada is not to protect our health. The purpose of Health Canada is to enforce the law. In their case, the Food and Drug Act and regulations. They are the police. And it makes sense when you think about it. We've passed this law. Somebody has to enforce it. Well, who is that? That's Health Canada. Some people have raised eyebrows. Well, wait a second, I thought they were there to protect our health. No, they're there to enforce the law, whatever the law is. So the purpose of our drug laws, because that's what we were speaking about, and I asked to see what what the response would be. It's not to protect our health. The purpose of our drug laws are to protect intellectual property rights. And most people don't understand that. But let me explain to you why I'm telling you this is if you want to get approval to treat a serious health condition, and that's where the serious money is treating serious health conditions, you have to go through what's called the new drug approval process. Now, it has been several years since I have been with an expert in that process, and that expert was under oath, but the last time I was with an expert and I asked, what does this cost? He said, well, $1 billion. And it can be less and it can be more, but the point is, it is just an obnoxious amount of money to go through this process for a serious health condition. Now, chemical drugs have intellectual property rights. They have patents. And I, in my lifetime, have not seen a natural health product that doesn't have patent protection go through the new drug approval process for a serious health condition, and I don't expect I ever will, because you have to have patent protection to recover the cost of going through the process. So I'll use Viagra as an example, because we're all familiar. When Viagra first came out, you know, it's for treating erectile dysfunction. Remember, it was in the news how expensive pills were, because they could charge an arm and a leg because people were willing to pay for it, right? But then when the patent ran off and the generic drug manufacturers could make sildenafil, which is just the generic name of the drug, the price has dropped. So if you go through this expensive process and you can recover your costs because nobody else can make the drug without paying you a license fee, you're going to recover your costs. Now, this process does not have to be this expensive. It does not have to be. We're choosing to structure our drug approval process in a certain way that it is expensive. And it could be done in other ways, and it could be done differently for natural health products, but the reality is we have to go through this structure. Now, it is essential for this to work that there be censorship. So our drug regime depends on censorship. And I'm going to be talking about different ways there's censorship, but basically manufacturers and distributors and retailers cannot legally give you truthful health information about natural products. And that might surprise some of you. But it is essential for this system for there to be censorship. And let me just give you a hypothetical to explain how this could work. So let's just hypothetically speaking, everyone here in this room, we come down with a serious health condition, and it's causing us to suffer. And so we go to our medical doctor, and the doctor sits us down and explains, listen, you have this condition. There is no cure. You're going to have this condition for the rest of your life. And so understand, you are never going to be well again. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to write you a prescription of a drug that will help reduce your symptoms. It's not going to cure you, it's going to reduce your symptoms. Now, there are some side effects. So, you know, you're going to have some side effects, and we're going to have to manage this, but this really is the best option and the only option for you. Now, what are we going to do? Almost everyone here, we're going to go to the doctor or the pharmacist. We're going to fulfill the prescription. While it's on patent protection, we're going to pay more, or our drug plans are going to pay more. While it's, you know, off, we'll pay less. But we will likely take that drug for the rest of our lives. And it's because we're not told of something else. So let's change the hypothetical. And we're just about to leave the doctor's office, and the doctor says, oh, just wait a second. I forgot. There's also a natural product that, you know, really it does cure it. I mean, because you take it and you're not going to have any effects, and you're going to be healthy again. And, you know, it's way cheaper because there's no patent protection on it, and a whole bunch of people are making it. What are we going to choose to do? We're going to choose to take the natural product. Now, do you see how that process breaks down? And when I say the whole system breaks down, Health Canada depends on the fees charged to the chemical pharmaceutical companies for a large part of its budget. So, you know, to go through this new drug approval process, you pay fees. You're paying yearly licensing fees. You're paying establishment fees. And I don't know what the percentage is, but a large percentage of Health Canada's budget is dependent upon fees paid by the chemical pharmaceutical company. So literally, they would have to fire employees and reduce in size if this regime fell down. So you need to understand that Health Canada employees actually have a personal interest in keeping this regime going. Conflict of interest, does anyone see this? It is absolutely a huge conflict of interest. So what's behind this? I've told you that Health Canada is planning on regulating natural health products under the same regulations as chemical drugs. Some of you that have been involved in the regulation issues for some time will probably be going, did you just say they're planning on regulating them the same as chemical drugs? Weren't we just there? Because it wasn't that long ago that there was only one set of regulations. There was the chemical drug regulations, and in the late 80s and early 90s, Health Canada was using these regulations to drive natural health products off the market because they just couldn't comply. And citizens rebelled. And the rebellion was so large that the Minister of Health at the time, Alan Rock, he held a press conference. He says, we're backing down. He asked the Standing Committee of Health to hold broad consultations. I see some people nodding their heads, they remember this. And the Standing Committee had reported that their consultations were the widest in Canadian history at that point. So they went all across the country, they had experts from all over, and they come out with a whole bunch of recommendations, and they were clear, you cannot regulate natural health products under the same set of regulations as chemical drugs. It's like fitting a square peg into a round hole. The traditions are different, the standards of evidence that you should use are different, it just doesn't fit. Now, interestingly, another one of the recommendations of the Standing Committee of Health is they said, you know what, we should have full disclosure here. Let's not have censorship. If you approve a claim for a natural health product, it should be law that you have to share with the public what the evidence you used to justify the claim was. So for example, if you use traditional evidence, well, let people know. If you had some clinical evidence, let people know. But the Standing Committee of Health was clear that actually Canadians should be informed of whatever the information was supporting a product so that Canadians could make an informed choice. Because the reality is with natural health products, a lot of people are making their own decisions, and it's very important for us to know why we're taking these products. Now, we're being told that one of the reasons why we need stricter regulations. So we already have fairly strict regulations, but we're being told by Health Canada that we need stricter regulations for natural health products. And the reason given is always safety, that we need to protect Canadians. And whenever you hear the government say to you, you need to be afraid, so you're getting a message of fear, 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 so let us help you. Whenever the government's saying that you are in danger, understand you are in danger. You're in danger of losing your rights. You're not in danger of what they're promoting. The government's use fear, we get afraid, and then we demand that the government takes away our rights so that we can be safe. I mean, the biggest example is this terrorism thing. We have lost rights since September, the terrorist attacks in New York. We've lost rights. We've lost privacy rights. We've lost the rights to, having our telecommunications monitored. We've lost a whole bunch of rights to protect us from terrorism. Do you know statistically you are more likely in Canada to be killed by your household furniture than by a terrorist? And would you give up your rights, any rights, to protect yourself from your household furniture? No, it's ridiculous, isn't it? So whenever the government is saying you need to be afraid, you need to ask, well, okay, you're telling me there's a risk. Can you compare that risk to something else so that I have a feeling of really how risky it is? And so let's talk about natural health products. I had done an access to information request to Health Canada some years ago, asking them, in all of Canadian history, let's go back to 1867 when we became a nation, can you give me all the evidence you have of deaths caused by natural health products? And the Health Canada quickly got back to me and said, we just simply don't have records going back that far, like, come on. But they did say we have pretty rigorous records going back to 1965. Because remember the thalidomide disaster, in response to that, Health Canada implemented a fairly rigorous adverse reaction reporting system, and they have kept all of the reports of adverse drug reactions since 1965. And I said, fine, let's just go back to 1965. They couldn't point out to me a single death caused by a natural health product going back to 1965. Not one. Okay, well let's compare then the entire natural health product industry. And I'm not saying there aren't deaths caused by natural health products, but I am saying that if there are not enough to be brought to the attention of Health Canada that they could share them with the public. Let's compare acetaminophen. Acetaminophen is just the generic name for Tylenol. Likely everyone in at this show has Tylenol either at home or in their purse, or acetaminophen. We'll just use the generic name. But a lot of people do. Some people are shaking their head, but I think we all know it's a really common thing. Now my understanding is that in Canada, on average, acetaminophen kills one person per million of the population per year. So I don't know, what's our population, 33 million, something like that? So we could expect in a given year there to be 33 deaths caused by acetaminophen in Canada, which would mean that we could take a 2-week period, we'd expect a death that we could point to, and yet we can't point to a death going back to 1965 caused by natural health products. So how much risk is there? I like to use peanut butter as an example, and we've got at the NHPPA booth a shirt that says ban peanut butter. We mean it as a spoof. But I think we're all aware that in Canada each year, people die from eating peanut butter. And unfortunately, some of those are very vulnerable. They're young kids, so the parents just don't know that there's an allergy. Now, if the government of Canada came to us as taxpayers and said, we need to spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to set up a peanut butter directorate, and we need to impose hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on the peanut butter industry so that we can protect Canadians from peanut butter, we would go, did I just hear you right? Like you're really going to spend that money to protect us? And it's not that there isn't a risk, but because we all have peanut butter in our home and we're not afraid of it, it's not enough of a risk that we would justify that, and yet we've done that with natural health products that are safer than peanut butter. The entire industry, if we're just looking at deaths, is safer than peanut butter. So the point I'm trying to make here is that risk is relative. Risk is relative. So whenever the government's asking you to be afraid, have it compared to other risks. So here we have Health Canada telling us that we need stricter regulations, and I think that our core problem is it's a philosophical problem, is that we are actually accepting beliefs that are not appropriate. And so let me explain what I think the philosophical problem is when you have a drug regime that says everything is illegal and that you can only legally have access to something that Health Canada approves, we've basically adopted a philosophical position that says that Health Canada has the sole right to decide how you're going to treat yourself when you're sick. And we've also adopted the philosophical position that Health Canada also has the right to determine what information you can have access to. I mean, I've used the analogy of you being in a cage and you're sick, and literally you can only have what Health Canada will stick through the bars. Well, the cage is unlocked. But you're not told that there's something outside of the cage because there's censorship. And the philosophical belief is a huge problem. Now, I believe in health freedom. And what health freedom is the belief that the individual has the right to decide how they're going to treat themselves when they're sick. And why I believe in health freedom is that our health journey is personal. So I don't care what your religious or non-religious background is. I think everyone will accept we're in a human body, that we're mortal, our body's going to die. And along the way, most of us are going to have periods of sickness and suffering, and then we're going to die. And some of us, our suffering is going to be so bad that we will actually want to take our lives. I mean, I just had a great aunt go through assisted suicide 2 weeks ago because she wasn't willing to suffer anymore. I mean, this happens. Now, when you're suffering, I can't take that. It's personal. And when I'm suffering, you can't. I mean, as much as we'd like to help somebody who's suffering, it is a personal journey. And how can Health Canada or the Government of Canada say that you don't have the right to determine how you're going to prevent or treat suffering? That's why I believe in health freedom. And I want to give you an example of health freedom, and I'm going to use True Hope. I know some people here are familiar with the True Hope story, but it's because we have a True Hope person here. But for those of you who aren't aware of the True Hope story, I'll be very brief. True Hope developed a product. It's a vitamin and mineral supplement called the Empower Plus, and it's to treat bipolar disorder. And they developed it because one of the founders, his wife had bipolar disorder, and she committed suicide. And 2 of his kids had bipolar disorder, and it was so bad that basically they were on the same trajectory as their mother. And out of desperation, they just decide, why don't we look and see if there's a nutritional basis to mental health? And they came up with this formula of vitamins and minerals, and it worked for his kids. And then it worked for some other lady in the neighborhood. And then people are talking, and well, can we try it? And before you know it, there's like thousands of people being managed. And I've spoken to some of these early participants because I was True Hope's lawyer when they were charged criminally, and I was trying to find witnesses. And some of these people were basically the worst of the worst. They were in and out of psych wards involuntarily, and their projected lifespan was not optimistic because they were just in this cohort that statistically a large number of them will commit suicide. And they knew there was no research. They basically knew they were the research. They knew that this was just based on anecdotal. They were participating because of anecdotal evidence, just stories of other people who were helped. And I ask you, shouldn't they have had that right? Now, this company gets charged, and they go to court. And I called as a witness a psychiatrist who teaches psychiatry at Harvard Medical School in Boston. And I called him as a witness for 2 reasons. One, this gentleman was an expert in treating bipolar disorder and other mental illnesses with chemical pharmaceutical drugs. He was he started the Journal of Child and Adolescent Psychopharmacology, and he was its editor for the first 10 years. The point I'm trying to make here is this gentleman understood published research. This gentleman understood the drug approval process. This gentleman understood how to treat mental illness with chemical pharmaceutical drugs, an expert. But he also had expertise in treating people with the Empower Plus. And when he was on the stand, he actually said to the court that Empower Plus destroyed his practice. And I asked him, well, like, what do you mean? Like, explain to us how this destroyed your practice. And he said, listen, before, when all of my patients were on the chemical drugs, I had to meet with every patient weekly to counsel them because they were very suicidal, and I also had to manage the side effects from the chemical pharmaceutical drugs. But once I had, half my patients on Empower Plus, I'm meeting with those patients every 3 to 6 months. We're not worried about suicide, we're not worried about side effects, and basically had nothing to do. And then I asked this psychiatrist, well, if you came down with bipolar disorder, what would you do? And I'm going to read you the question and the answer word for word out of the court transcript, because this is health freedom. So here's my question to the psychiatrist. Question. Okay, so you can't tell us what you would choose for a patient, but I'm going to ask you, if you came down with bipolar disorder, what would you do after you got over your panic? Answer. And the reaction to your question, I actually probably would choose Empower. I know the trials aren't there, but I've seen it. And I think given the choice between committing myself to a lifetime of lesser stability and mental fogging, I would first want to try e-Empower. Now, when this psychiatrist says, I know the trials aren't there, he means I know that sizable double-blind clinical trials necessary to get Health Canada approval are not there. This is not one of the drugs that Health Canada will put through the bars of the cage for you. I know it. That evidence isn't there. I know the trials aren't there, but I've seen it. I've seen it. He has seen patients' lives turned around by the use of this product, anecdotal evidence. So here is somebody who understands the drug approval process is saying, I know that evidence isn't there, but I've seen it, and I would choose to try e-Empower Plus. That is health freedom. I'm not begrudging Health Canada for wanting a drug approval process, but isn't it interesting when we've structured our affairs such that you or I are not supposed to have access to anything that the government doesn't approve of? There's something fundamentally wrong with this picture. Now, the interesting thing is True Hope, it's illegal for them to read that to you. It's illegal for them to give you a copy of that transcript. I don't know, how many published clinical studies does True Hope have now? How many? 34. So 34. So there are 34 published, peer-reviewed research pieces on e-Empower Plus, and I think it's funded by about 4 governments, right? Okay, 14 different universities. I think most of this research is publicly funded. It's illegal for them to share it with you. It's illegal for them to share with you published, peer-reviewed research paid for by governments. You're not supposed to know that there's something outside of your cage. Now, I actually had to go through quite a journey learning about how this drug approval process works and research and all of this stuff. I told you that Health Canada's justifying things being tightened up here because we need more safety. Another reason why Health Canada is saying, well, let's get rid of the NHP regulations and let's regulate natural health products the same as chemical drugs, is they're saying we have this danger of failed efficacy. Failed efficacy. And what they mean by that is, an efficacy in the drug world just means it works. It's been proven to work, okay? So failed efficacy, according to Health Canada, is you know, we're worried that Canadians might be taking natural health products, the implication being that they don't work, and so they'll be delaying getting proper medical treatment and taking the approved drugs that work. Okay, so do you understand what they're saying? They're saying there is actually a danger that Canadians will take natural products, they don't say that don't work, but that's what they mean, and so you're going to delay getting proper medical treatment, meaning going to a doctor and getting a chemical pharmaceutical drug that they say that works. And in fact, this morning I was talking to a lady and she was saying, well, don't we want, you know, the same clinical evidence that we need for chemical drugs for NHP so that we know it works? And I had to laugh because I think some people would be shocked at how untrustworthy it is when Health Canada approves a drug and says that it works. I was cross-examining a Health Canada expert. This was a psychiatrist that was involved, ran a company that ran clinical trials and got psychiatric drugs through this expensive new drug approval process. And I'm cross-examining this guy, and he actually starts complaining to me under oath about how hard it is to get through this process. And he's saying, you know, for a typical antidepressant, when a company comes to me now for us to go through this process, I will run 8. We'll just start out of the gate. We're running 8 double-blind clinical trials because we know it's going to take 8 to get the 2 we need to give to Health Canada showing that it works. And when we say showing that it works, I mean basically they're looking for a statistical separation between the chemical and the sugar pill. And that's what we're talking about, a statistical separation. and then, okay, well, it's a big enough separation, we can show that the drug works. But they don't have to give Health Canada the 6 trials where they didn't have this statistical separation. You literally could be in a situation where the 6 trials showed the sugar pill worked better. I mean, the British government did a meta-analysis of every clinical trial they could get their hands on for the mainstream antidepressants and concluded the research shows the sugar pills work slightly better than the psychiatric drugs. So, no, I know, but I mean, it's crazy, isn't it? And then let's just even ignore the fact that clinical trials can be manipulated and structured in such a way to try and get the result that you want, which in this case is to show a separation. I wasn't going to share this, but just because we're on the topic, I think I will read for you a quote from Marcia Angel, and she is the editor of the New England Journal of Medicine. And she's also a medical doctor. And she wrote a piece where basically she was explaining all the different ways that drug companies can manipulate clinical trials to get the result that they want. And so what I'm going to read to you is a quote from January 1st, 2015, New York Review of Books, volume 56, number 1. And so Miss Angel writes, after she's described all the ways that clinical trials can be gamed, "The problems I've discussed are not limited to psychiatry, although they reach their most florid form there. Similar conflicts of interest and biases exist in virtually every field of medicine, particularly those that rely heavily on drugs and devices." Now listen carefully. "It is simply no longer possible to believe much of the clinical research that is published or to rely on the judgment of trusted physicians or authoritative medical guidelines. I take no pleasure in this conclusion, which I reach slowly and reluctantly over my 2 decades as an editor of the New England Journal of Medicine." So the point I'm making is that when Health Canada is trying to scare you saying, oh, natural products don't work and you need to take the drugs that are proven to work, you would not be remiss to be a little skeptical about our drug approval process. And it would be easy to fix. If our purpose of our drug laws in this process was to have good health outcomes, why wouldn't we, instead of accepting clinical trials given to us by a drug company, say, oh, you want approval for this drug and you're coming to us because clearly you know it works, so you give us the funding and we will independently hire 2 separate groups to run clinical trials, which we will structure, and clearly your drug works, the results will come in, and we're just going to be really happy to approve your drug. And I see some of you shaking your heads going, well, actually, that would be a good way of doing it, wouldn't it? Because then we would get rid of this bias. But we've chosen deliberately not to do that. And I want you to ask yourselves the question, why? Why would we choose not to structure our drug laws in such a way that we're going to have good outcomes that way? So I just see that I need to jump ahead to a couple of things. Now, let's talk about these changes that are coming down the pipe. So I've already told you that Health Canada is planning on getting rid of our natural health product regulations and moving us into a single set of regulations with the chemical non-prescription drugs. And these are going to be called self-care products. Now, there's a couple of problems for us in the natural health product industry. And the first is that right now under the natural health product regulations, we can use traditional evidence. And I've already mentioned that to prove that a drug works. We're going to be losing that right. So if, I used the example, did I use it already, of Lyme's and scurvy? I mean, if we wanted, let's say scurvy for whatever reason became a problem and we formed a company and we just wanted to use lime extract to treat scurvy. And you all know that would work, and we could use the British Navy records to prove, no more of that. We'd now have to run clinical trials, but we would never run clinical trials because we have no intellectual property rights and anyone could copy our product. So we're going to lose the right to use traditional evidence to make efficacy claims. We're also going to be subject to really harsh penalties and powers. Does anyone remember the Bill C-51 fight back in 2008? Some people are shaking heads. So back in 2008, Bill C-51, the government was trying to amend the Food and Drug Act to increase the penalties for non-compliance and to bring in a whole bunch of powers for Health Canada that really would just totally trounce property rights. And so, for example, right now, if you break the law regarding a natural health product, you can be fined up to $5,000. They want to increase it to $5 million per day that an offense happens. Because right now an offense could happen over a week, it could happen over a month, and you're facing a $5,000 fine. But they want to increase it to $5 million a day that an offense is happening, and they want to pierce the corporate veil. So if you're a company, yeah, we can go after the company, but any director, officer, employee, anyone involved in the offense is also can be personally charged and liable. And that's just, like, who could survive that? Nobody could. And how is this good for our industry? Now, so that's why we rebelled back in 2008 over Bill C-51. So the government learned, like in Bill C-251, they got beaten up. Let me just share with you a funny story. Those that were here this morning, I've already heard it, but I was in the Prime Minister's office meeting with another NHPPA member, and we're leaving the meeting, and Laurie Thronis, who was number 2 at the Ministry of Health at the time, was showing us out of the building. And Peter, who was with me, said, "Hey, Laurie, have you read Shawn's discussion paper on Bill C-51? And you know how in the cartoons, if somebody gets mad, a red line goes up their face? I actually saw that. Only time in my life, but honest to God, a red line went up Laurie Thronis's face, and then he explained why he was so mad. He said, what was happening is people were writing their angry letters, and then they were printing out the discussion paper, which was about 30 pages long, and stapling it to their letters. So the mail was so bulky, it was coming in several wheelbarrows every day. And it was that type of thing that got the government's attention. We had MPs tell us that no issue had shut down their office like Bill C-51. People were so angry. So the government understood we can't threaten natural health products with these powers and penalties. So what they did is they waited a couple of years, and then they introduced Vanessa's law. I don't know if you remember, but Vanessa was a teenager who was taking an anti-acne pharmaceutical, and she had an adverse reaction and died. And her father, Terrence Young, who's an MP, wrote a book about it. And so this was called Vanessa's law, and it brought in those powers and penalties in Bill C-51, but they didn't apply to natural health products. They created a new category in the Food and Drug Act called therapeutic products, and therapeutic products is defined, basically, therapeutic products are drugs, but don't include natural health products as defined in the natural health product regulations. And that last part is the key, because the NHPPA, our discussion paper, said, well, this is a Trojan horse bill. It's basically to get inside our camp and then destroy us while we're sleeping, because if you are correct, Parliament, that you don't want these powers to ever apply to natural health products, then just put the definition of natural health products in the Food and Drug Act and say therapeutic products don't involve natural health products. Because then if you want to make them apply, you have to change the Food and Drug Act, which is 3 readings in Parliament, or House of Commons, 3 readings in Senate. We'd all have lots of time to react. But when you say, as defined by the natural health product regulations, all you have to do is drop the regulations, repeal the regulations, which no vote in Parliament for that. The government just publishes in the Gazette. Twice we repealed the NHP regs. And now we're all subject to those powers and penalties. Well, what is Health Canada saying they're going to do? We are going to regulate natural health products under a single set of regulations with the chemical drugs, and we're going to call them self-care products. They are going to repeal the NHP regulations, and now we'll all be subject to these powers and penalties that we rebelled about, and we won't even have time to respond because it's not something the MPs even vote on. So we've been totally gamed with Vanessa's law. Now, another thing that's coming down the pipe is right now, natural health product companies do not pay when they submit a license application. They do not pay yearly fees to have their licenses renewed. They do not pay for establishment licenses like the pharmaceutical companies do. And Health Canada is saying, well, when we're all one happy family as self-care products with a single set of regulations, how can we be charging the chemical companies and not the natural companies? Now, we don't know what the fee structure is going to be, but we do know the last time they proposed a fee structure, I had medium-sized companies calling me saying, we're going to go out of business. Now, I was on a call on Monday with some manufacturers, and one said, you know, half of our product line we don't make money on. We either lose money or we're just breaking even, but half of our line we don't make money on, but we continue to make them because we know some people rely on them and are getting relief. And this is a common thing. This is a common thing, especially with the smaller manufacturers. But they said, you know, if we're going to have to be paying yearly licensing fees, likely we can't continue that practice. And so I just bring that up because every time you increase the regulatory burden and increase the cost, you start losing products at the margin. There's just no way around it. So we're going to be coming in with cost recovery. We're also going to be increasing censorship, and they're going to be increasing censorship in two ways. So the first way is right now under our natural health product regulations, there's actually no limit on the type of claim that you could be approved for. So literally, if you had a cure for cancer and you could provide enough research, you could get a treatment claim, we cure cancer. You know, they have been limiting us to what we call structure function claims. So for example, with, you know, True Hope, where, you know, there's a lot of evidence of them treating bipolar, and I know they treat bipolar disorder, but they can't share that with you. All they can legally say is their approved claim, which I think is supports mental health and well-being. And let me just segue on that, because there's a health cost here. So I've got 3 kids. Let's say one of my, they're all adults, but let's say one of my adult children comes down with bipolar disorder and is part of that, you know, worst group that is in and out of psych wards. And, you know, the psychiatrist sits me down one day and says, Mr. Buckley, you know, though, that brief window, like when your child is acclimatizing to the drug cocktail, because in the hospital they're just totally doped out. So, and it takes them time to get normal again. You have to get used to these drugs. So you know that period of time, your child's becoming, they're getting their mind back, they're getting their life back, but before they become really suicidal and manic and the whole thing, you've got that brief window. Mr. Buckley, you spend every second you can with them, because I've just seen it before, your child's not going to be alive in a few years. And I'm broken, right? Because all of the approved products Health Canada says my child can have aren't working. And now I'm looking for answers. And I go into the health food store and I pick up that bottle of VM Power Plus and I read, supports mental health and well-being. What am I going to do? I'm going to put it back and I'm going to walk away having no idea that that might be the product that could save my child's life. I'm just pointing out that there's a health consequence to restricting truthful health information, as opposed to making it law that we have to know the basis of what you're saying. So I was talking about how under the NHP regulations, there's not really a restriction on the claims that we can make, but Health Canada is informally restricting us to structure function claims. Well, under this new self-care framework, apparently it's going to be written into the regulations, because Health Canada has been clear that there will be no claims allowed for any condition for which you would seek the advice of a healthcare practitioner. And they're not meaning just medical doctors, they're meaning anyone that's licensed in the health field in a province. That could be a nutritionist, it could be a chiropractor, it could be a nurse. Anyone that you would seek medical advice for, you can't use a self-care product to treat that type of condition. So we're going to have a reining in, even a greater reining in of claims. There's also going to be administrative penalties. Now, let me explain that. So the Food and Drug Act is a criminal act. If you break it, you can be charged and go to court and you can be fined. But that's actually very onerous for Health Canada. They have to prepare the case, they have to go to court and get cross-examined. They don't like it. And sometimes they lose. They really don't like that. Administrative penalties, though, are so convenient. They can show up and do an inspection and find problems, and they just write you a fine, and you don't go to court. You can't dispute it in court. You can dispute it to another Health Canada employee on very limited grounds, and it's actually, we're told it's a good thing because, hey, this is less expensive than court, the fines are less, but really it's used as income generation for the agency. So invariably they hire more inspectors, and the inspectors know that they have to find things wrong, because they're paying their wages and they're paying their managers' wages, and it becomes an income stream. So really what's going to happen is we're going to have more inspections and we're going to have increased cost because of those. So we've got really a bigger train wreck than we had with Bill C-51. So what do? Now Health Canada announced a timetable for these changes, and their timetable said, well, we're going to make label changes in 2018, and they made label changes in 2018. They said early 2019, we're going to start this harmonization process. Now nothing's happened yet, and the contact person in Health Canada will not return my calls to tell me when it's going to happen. But we've heard kind of on the quiet that they will probably wait until after the federal election, because they know this is going to be unpopular, and just it's very common practice in the bureaucracy, the civil service, to wait until after an election before you bring about unpopular changes, because then people will calm down by the time the next election happens. So we have a window, I think we have a window between now and October or November when we have the federal election. And almost no member of parliament was around when we had the citizen rebellion to bring about the regulations. Almost no member of parliament was around during Bill C-51. They don't even know this is an issue. So we need to create a citizen rebellion again. And the NHPPA has basically a three-part plan to do this. So one is get people writing and phoning and meeting with their MPs saying, I want this self-care framework stopped, so that everyone knows that it's unpopular. The second thing is remember I told you that Vanessa's law was a bit of a Trojan horse because it didn't put the definition of NHP in the Act. We've drafted a bill to put the NHPs in the Act, the definition. And so the second part of our thing is to call for the definition of natural health product to be placed in the Food and Drug Act. And then the third part of our strategy is to have the Charter of Health Freedom enacted. And for those of you who don't know what the Charter of Health Freedom is after the Bill C-51 fiasco, there were a couple of cross-Canada meetings where basically consumers and manufacturers and practitioners got together and said, we're always reacting. So Health Canada will be always taking away and making it tougher. And the best we can do is fight to try and maintain the status quo, but it's unending. How do we solve this? How do we solve this? And so it was just basically brainstorming, and it was decided that the best way to solve it would basically to be come up with a health bill of rights, and it's called the Charter of Health Freedom. And what it does is it takes those health rights that the courts say that we have, and it basically codifies them. And it takes the regulation of natural products and moves it from Health Canada to a new Ministry of Wellness. And the Ministry of Wellness cannot be the same minister as the Health Minister, because we want to get rid of pharmaceutical influence. It creates a Health Freedom Ombudsman, because the reality is right now, if Health Canada is taking away a product that you rely on, either to stay alive or to, alleviate suffering, you really have no recourse. I mean, as a lawyer, if you came to me, even if you were loaded and could afford it, I'd say likely we're not going to be able to solve your problem. Just the speed of the court process and how difficult the government is to deal with. And if you have no money, you have no option at all. If there's any area where we need somebody that could step in and intervene and mitigate when you really need something, it's in the area of health. And so that's what the Charter of Health Freedom is. So what we're asking people to do is we have a booth over there, and we have a list, and we're asking for everyone's name and everyone's email address, because we are going to be sending out calls for action where we want you writing letters to your MP. We want you meeting with your MP. We want you writing the Prime Minister. We want you writing the Minister of Health. So not just your MP, but Health Minister, Minister of Health. We actually want you to be getting your network involved. So I was saying this morning, every one of us has a network, even just, an email list. And if you passionately provided the materials, so we have materials explaining all of this. If you passionately appeal to your group saying you got to get involved, you're only going to get maybe 5 or 10% involved. But that 5 or 10% is going to use their networks and get 5 or 10, and it's going to go and go and go, and it's like an MLM thing. Before you know it, we have wheelbarrows of mail going into the Health Minister's office and the Prime Minister's office and your MP's office, and that's where we get real change. because we know we can get real change. We've done it before, and now we need to do it again. So I'm imploring everyone here to, get connected with us so that you can, know what to do, but then also this only works if everyone here actually takes ownership and does things.